Find sources for your boring family history. Recently, a client for whom I was beta reading their project complained after I marked up their story. I repeatedly asked, "Where's the source for this? What is this based on?" Apparently, I asked those two questions too frequently because the client retorted, "I don't want to add those genealogy sources to my family history book. They will make my story look stuffy and no one will want to read it." So at first, I was a little shocked to hear this client didn't want me to question where she obtained her information. But then her question settled a little bit and I understood what she was actually asking and saying. In short, she felt anxious about whether anyone would want to read her story if it overflowed with citations like an academic thesis. Is her fear valid that her story would become a snooze fest with so many well-founded citations? Typically, when you want a page turner, you pick up a book like A Women's Place by Lynn Austen or The Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. The first is a historical fiction set during World War II and follows the lives of three women involved in keeping the home front functioning. One woman begins working in a factory to prove that women can do such work. The second is a fantasy novel set in a fictional place that closely resembles Ireland, Scotland, and Scandinavia. The stories have complex characters, fleshed out story arcs, and tremendous setting details, but they have no genealogy sources, meaning perhaps these characters are based on someone else, but the actual individuals in the stories are not real. And granted, these stories are lovely and they don't have stuffy sources cluttering up their way. By contrast, The Empire of the Sun or Moon, written by S.C. Goodwin, is a book that falls into the nonfiction category and is informative about the last great Comanche war chief in Texas. Unlike traditional genealogy books, this well-sourced book does not put footnotes at the bottom of every page or every chapter. Instead, the author has a notes section and bibliography at the end of the book. In the book, The Three Generations of Descendants of Shapely Prince Ross, an early Texas pioneer, Karen Stein Daniel uses superscript citations. Then at the book's end, the sources are listed in a section called Endnotes. While I prefer one book per person like the two I have back on my shelf, the compilation that Karen put together has several generations and offers bite-sized nuggets to whet your appetite. All in all, what results in a stuffy family history is not the placement or use of citations, but how the author writes a story. While we should take counsel from Dragnet's Sergeant Joe Friday, who often requests just the facts, ma'am, we do not have to present those details in an insomnia-producing way. Knowing the sources from which genealogy facts originates ensures that we write nonfiction content rather than fantasy. Sources help ensure you're writing the correct details. If you have a gold rush ancestor who documented his journey west, you need to know the difference between the Pinta Trail and the Gilead Trail. A reference source like a map can keep those paths from crossing when they shouldn't. Perhaps you're writing about an immigrant who passed through the port of Baltimore, Maryland in 1855. You might want to know the difference between a frigate and a schooner if you wish to discuss the trials of crossing the ocean. You'll need a source to support your claims and differentiate your boats. Quality references prove that we're writing about real people. So where does this tedious nature of family histories lie if we can't blame the sources? A boring family history is the fault of the writer's format or style. The most widely used genealogy book format is register style. In this style, you write a brief paragraph for each member of the family. The paragraph includes some details about a person's dates and places for their birth, baptism, and so forth. The paragraph might identify the person's spouse and children, and all these items are linked to proper citations. While this format earns awards from many genealogy societies, does the average reader like this approach? When I say average, I'm talking about those relatives who roll their eyes when you start talking about genealogy at family gatherings. Do they like that style I just showed you? Typically, no. Therefore, you have a decision to make. Are you trying to appease the academic audience or a non-genealogist? That's not to say you can't make a register-style book more interesting like the examples that I show on screen. The key point is to go back to the conversation with my client. She felt the format was stuffy and boring, which swung her opinion about using sources to the extreme of not wanting to use them at all. Thankfully, family history writers have numerous format options. I discussed many of those in the video, What Family History Books Should You Create? It is on the main channel, and you can also read the blog post over on Family History Fanatics. So stop blaming the sources. Instead, choose the format that fits your intended audience. Next, add details. How often have you read something like this and thought, that's a great story? When it comes to enjoyable family histories, people want to read something more than the bare facts. Readers want to understand their family in context of their world and their choices and their family members. For instance, why did a single man migrate from Baden, Germany in 1853 to Cleveland, Ohio? Or, what was it like to be a Jewish model in New York City in 1945 and have a photographer enter you in a beauty pageant? What was it like to attend a leading music college in Paris at age 10? We can piece together the basic details that tell us what happens in an ancestor's life through school records, newspaper articles, passenger lists, census records, and so much more. Let's go back to Joseph's story. Notice that he was born in the Republic of Texas and died a year after Texas became a state. You can add historical context to his story to help us understand those changes. Did you calculate his age at death? He's about 9 years old. How many siblings does he have at the time of his death who will grieve his loss? How old were his parents? How did he die? Did you notice that his birthplace and death place are different? How far apart are these two locations? Did his family move there, or are they visiting, or was there a boundary change? He died in February. While Texas isn't known for snowstorms, February is cold, and winter often causes the spread of illness. Did weather or communicable diseases play a role in his death? Also, what else happened to his family that year? Who else was born? Who married? Who died? Who moved away? If we take time to answer those questions, we can turn 2 lines about a boy who died in Texas at the age of 9 into several paragraphs. And I haven't even added much more social history other than the fact that Texas became a state during Joseph's lifetime. If this is possible with a short life, imagine what we can do with an ancestor who lived into their 60s. And also notice that the answers to each question will require sources to supply the answers. Details make a story more enjoyable to read, so add them whenever possible. For more tips on including details in your story, read Describe Your Ancestor's Physical Appearance and Adding Historical Contents, or order my book, A Recipe for Writing Family History. All of that is linked in the show notes. Going back to my client, with time, we worked through the process of deciding which format would meet her needs best for approachable reading while supporting with references. If you will turn your attention to how you will deliver and package your story rather than fighting sources, you will produce something that your intended audience will find enjoyable. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment and click the like button, then check out this tip on how to make your writing more enjoyable.